Awesome. Well, here we go. Hey, Emily. Hey, Rachel. Hey, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so excited for the first Women in Marketing Kickoff webinar. As we were going through the prep for this the past few weeks, we've had so many interesting conversations on what this should look like, what we should even talk about. So thank you to everyone who shared in that channel thread on different topics and different questions that you possibly had. And so hopefully this will be super helpful for y'all. Now, as we're getting started, I see so many amazing names that I recognize. And for those of you who haven't connected with each other in the community yet, please, please, please drop your name. Well, I guess, never mind, don't drop your name because we see your name, but say hi, tell us where you're coming from, and maybe one question that like you're super curious about or a topic that you're most interested in. And we can add that to the list today. So we were just chatting. Emma is joining us from lovely, rainy San Francisco.
Yes.
And Mallory, you are joining us from lovely
Belfast, Northern Ireland, but I don't have the accent yet.
So it's much later there, right? I feel so bad I could have done this earlier.
That's 4.
Okay.
So it's a good end to the day. Yeah.
We love that. We've got lots of people. We got some folks coming from California. We're so excited to have y'all here. And as you're jumping in the chat, make sure that your chat is turned to everyone. I am always bad about this. I literally just had to check it probably 3 times because I will tell people to do that and then I'll start posting just to host and panelists. So make sure it's turned to everyone. We're going to give it about a minute or 2 until we get started. But it's so good. Danielle, so excited to see you. Can't wait to come out and visit Raleigh. And oh man, coming from a snowy winter wonderland, Amanda, I'm very jealous. That sounds outstanding. What I would give for some snow right now.
What a way to kick off December.
Yeah.
Like immediate Spotify Christmas playlist or holiday playlist.
With snow. I probably would have called in if it was like snowy in Lubbock, Texas today. I would have absolutely called in and read a book on my couch. That sounds lovely. But anywho, okay, well, we've got a good amount of folks in here. So just kind of a brief rundown. One, make sure if you've got any questions at any point in the conversation today, there's going to be times where you're like, wow, this really resonates with me, or what would you do if, or you think of a certain situation that's happened in your life, feel free, drop it in the chat, drop it in the Q&A box. That's at the very bottom panel of the screen. Only us on the host side will see it. If you're uncomfortable and you don't want us to call your name out, or you want to just direct message me in the chat, you can actually just send it to either one of us and we'll answer it and share the question, keep your name out of it. We totally respect that. I know there's been times when I've been curious about stuff and had questions and I'm like, yeah, I don't want people to know that I'm asking this. So totally fine. We have that option for y'all. And we're going to be talking about so many different differences where it's a really cool session today is Emma and Mallory come from very different, unique situations. One's in a corporate role, one's in a startup, one is about to have kids, one has no kids. And so we're really going to be discussing a lot of the nitty gritties. The goal is for this to be a very different session. This isn't going to be a shame on anyone that isn't a female. This is going to be a how do we do better for each other? How do we encourage each other? How can we share the experiences that we've had to help each other and really be there and support each other? So hopefully this resonates with y'all. Would love to get your feedback at the end. But to kick this off, I will let Emma introduce herself, and then Mallory, I'll let you take it away from there.
Awesome. So hi guys, I'm Emma Calderon. I am the Senior Director of Content and Communications over at Qualified, which is the pipeline generation platform for Salesforce. I've been with Qualified for about 18 months, and I love my job. We're growing like crazy. It's really chaotic and different than my corporate background. I joined Qualified from Salesforce. But I love being a part of a company where I can like see my DNA in the things that we're building. So having a ton of fun. And as Katie mentioned, I'm the one expecting my first children. I'm currently pregnant with twin boys.
We are very excited. You have to keep us up to date on that. Feel free to drop that registry in the Slack channel. Mallory, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Mallory. I do see a lot of you from North Carolina. I'm originally from North Carolina, which is why I do not have a Northern Irish accent or any Irish accent. But yeah, I live in Belfast, so, different to Emma, I've primarily been in startups most of my career, apart from one or two. I'm currently head of marketing at a company called Clearword, which is, a pre-seed startup. If you haven't heard of us, won't be offended. I've only been there for 7 months, so we're still very new. But essentially, we are a meeting management platform. So we were to join this call, we'd automate all the notes for Katie, and then there'd be a transcription and recording and everything ready to go. So it automates the process, which is great. I don't have kids. I have a puppy, which I'm not saying is the same as kids, but he is a demon at the moment. So any tips that you have for that, I would be open to it. And I've also primarily had male bosses throughout my career. So, that's a very, unique thing, I think, that somehow I've managed to have happen to me. So if you have any questions around that, feel free to put them in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Mallory. Like I said, this is going to be a really interactive session. Please drop your questions in the chat, drop them in the Q&A box. If you want us to ask it anonymously, just DM us in the chat. Just change it to either Katie, Mallory, or Emma, and we'll ask that for you. Just let us know. But yeah, so one of the things that we thought about whenever we were kind of planning this session was how do we showcase the differences of experiences? But then also how do we enable y'all to feel like you can overcome so many different obstacles that we all face in our day-to-day roles? And so we're going to kind of kick off a little bit with the idea of dealing with a more corporate organization versus a startup. And so one of the questions that was sent in earlier is kind of geared towards you, Mallory, with how do you get comfortable thinking big picture at a startup when you get so much visibility? There's a lot of risk of, suggesting ideas, and sometimes it can be easier in a corporate organization to kind of hide from the masses, especially as a female leader. What advice would you give, and maybe share a situation that you had to deal with around that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, every company I've had is that situation. Again, unintentionally, every role that I've been in, I've been the first marketing hire. Even if there was a CMO in place, I was still brought in to start the strategy, and then they just kind of, did CMO things. But my advice is, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. I mean, especially in startups, everyone, depending how small it is right now, I'm in a company of 10. I'm the only marketer. I've been in startups where I've been one of 6. I've been in one of 5. You are going to be the face of that department. Even if you have other marketers with you, you're likely brought in as a specialist in something, if it's demand, if it's content, if it's SEO, you're going to be that voice. And it's scary, especially if you have imposter syndrome. I mean, I do, I'm sure we all do. You just have to kind of get comfortable with, being vocal, sharing your opinions. And, honestly, the worst they could say is no. It's not actually that scary. If you have a great idea, share it. They might have thought of it and didn't know how to do it, and you do. So, you can miss opportunities. And it sounds cheesy, but, failing fast, try lots of things, get creative, even if you don't have that big of a budget, which you probably won't, or a team at all, which I currently don't, or, there's going to be a lot of things you don't have, and you have to be comfortable in that and just figure out what could you do that's really cool and try it out and make it work. And there's a thing, don't know how you all feel about it, but I like to add a lot of humor into everything, just because marketing can be scary, and also being alone gets lonely. So, marketing I see in any company is an extension of every single team, even if that team is also one other person, like one engineer, one product person. So you got to make it clear that you will be what I call like the annoying marketer, and you will be asking them things. You'll be sharing all this great stuff that you're doing, or you're seeing, or other companies are doing that are awesome and you should try. And you're going to be vocal, but it's not to, disrupt their workflow. It's to try and get them involved. So, my past company, it was called Cloudsmith, and they were a DevOps company. So I was working with a team of engineers who were my personas. So I was like, hey guys, could you help me figure out what messaging would you resonate with? What would you do this webinar for me? Would you speak on this event? Those things, which engineers are scared to death to do. But they understood that they were speaking kind of to themselves, and they were the best ones to know. I don't know engineering. I'm married to an engineer. I couldn't write code to save my life, but it worked. So, being comfortable, getting out of your comfort zone, helps your company, but also helps you like understand that you're growing. So that's my biggest advice. I kind of went on a tangent, but I'm really passionate about that.
No, I really love that. And I really like how you said be the annoying marketer, because there's so many opportunities, I think, especially in a startup where people just assume that you can take on all these different things and you kind of have to, I mean, really be your own advocate and go to those different parts of the organization and ask for that type of support and show them, hey, if you want this level of success like this company, here's what we need in order for that to happen. Emma, I'm super curious, what about you in a more of a corporate environment? How do you get comfortable with sharing new ideas and big ideas when so often it's more about this is how we've always done it, so we're always going to continue to do that?
Totally. First and foremost, I think building rapport with your colleagues is super important. So similar to Mallory, I'm an extrovert. I like to infuse humor in everything. We work so much, you might as well make it a little enjoyable. So showing up like authentically and like being yourself at work is really important to me. And so I think that's kind of like table stakes for how I approach work, of just like being myself, you get what you get. But as far as kind of like building rapport goes, open communication is so important. You don't know everything, neither does the person that you're talking to. And so when you kind of like have a kickoff conversation about like a new project, you're throwing out new ideas, just like setting the table with some like baseline, like, this is where I'm coming from, I know this is the objective, and kind of starting things off as a brainstorm is really helpful, I think, to get the conversation started, so that one, no idea feels like it's getting like kind of railroaded or shut down immediately. Because the worst thing, like Mallory mentioned, like, yes, you can have a bad idea and it gets poo-pooed, but that hurts your feelings sometimes. And it's like, how do you bounce back from that like really quickly and like not take it personally? I think that as you kind of mature into your career is a muscle that gets built just kind of naturally over time, but you got to take a few knocks to build that muscle and make sure that your skin gets a little bit thicker. So I think my biggest advice as it relates to that is just kind of showing up authentically, being yourself, and kind of approaching each conversation as a brainstorm to get to a solution versus like, I know what I'm doing, this is what we should do. I think it's kind of a better way to approach conversations. And then if you are working with a more difficult stakeholder, my boss, something that she said a couple of months ago, I forget what webinar she was on or podcast, but something that really resonated with me. And as I look back in my career, that's really served me well, is if you need to build trust, just put your head down and work to prove that impact that you can have to your organization. I know Kim Kardashian got a lot of flack for saying like, I feel like no one wants to work these days, but sometimes it feels like it can be true, because like you have so many conversations about things and then nothing is actually like happening. And so like putting your thoughts in a project plan against a brief, whatever, and showing up to the meeting with like a place to start is a great way to kind of build that buy-in and rapport, to show that you actually want to do the work and build that trust with your counterparts.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love that. One of the things that my boss, Jason, is starting to implement for us is like a maximum amount of hours per week in meetings, which kind of scares me a little bit.
Jealous.
Because, well, in theory, you're like, oh, this is awesome. But and I told him whenever he asked my advice on it, he's like, what do you think? And I was like, I think it's just so fluid. Like there's so many times where it's like, oh, I don't have a lot of meetings this week and I can really be heads down. And then other times it's like, I am in 4 hours of back-to-back meetings. That happened, I think, on like Monday. I was in 3.5 hours and I was like, this is so much. But I agree. So oftentimes we just spend the time chatting about it all. And it's like, okay, but when are we actually going to implement, and like how much of this can we do asynchronously? But one of the things that you shared was each conversation is a brainstorm to a solution. And I absolutely love that. I think sometimes so often it's really easy for us to come in with these great ideas and be like, here's what we should do. And like you said, you get your feelings hurt because you spend so much time and effort and you're like, I've really done it. This is amazing. And everyone else is like, this is shit. Like, this is not good. And you're like, well, thank you. And it's a good reminder that it's not you that they're saying is shitty. It's your thoughts.
Yeah.
So disassociating from some of that, I think, is important. But I like that idea. And I definitely think, especially when you're dealing with difficult coworkers or difficult leadership, and you come into it like, hey, the goal of this is to accomplish this. And here's some thoughts. Let's discuss what this looks like, and really just being focused on what the end goal is and kind of like building with that. I think that's just outstanding advice. I didn't know if you guys wanted to add anything to that, so that's why I stopped talking.
No?
Okay, good. Okie dokie. So one of the questions that we got that was really, really interesting, Emily shared she's a marketing associate and the only marketing hire for a small early stage VC fund. She's looking for advice on balancing priorities when you're trying to build out marketing, comms, PR, and infrastructure while also executing it to grow brand recognition, all while being a beginner with no marketing mentorship to help her figure out what she's doing wrong. So what do you do whenever, I know both of you have had boatloads of stuff thrown on your shoulders. Where do you start whenever you're starting to build emotion out, and what does that look like?
I mean, in that situation specifically, I think an advantage that you do have that I'd recommend, and this is, if you're comfortable asking, is, your CEO and the other executives in your company you do have to help you likely have, support in coaches, advisors, or the investors know people. And the investors want you guys to succeed if you do have them. They will absolutely, likely give you free help from other CMOs or, senior marketers out there. Otherwise, you have this community to also help you. So I would start there to make sure that you do feel supported in that way. But then from, choosing which tactics, just take a breath and think about what it is you actually think is going to have the biggest impact and narrow it down to 2 or 3 things, at least for the first quarter, especially for 2023 being so crazy. And start from there and just make it clear to the CEOs. I'm sure they already know because they hired you, like you have skills, but you don't know all the things. Nobody does. So the 2 or 3 things you're going to choose are going to have the biggest impact, and you're going to focus on those. And then when that is successful, you'll probably have more money, more resources to help you. Then you can get all these other shiny things. So, personally, I would put PR to the side for now. That doesn't actually do much for anybody that often. If there's any PR people, sorry, I studied PR, I get it. But, I would say put that on hold and put your budget and your resources and other things and really push for an advisor, especially right now before Christmas and in, January, and let them lead you and guide you in what you should be doing, because it is personal per company and your own situation of, the tactics you should use.
Totally. To add to that, also remind me of her name, Katie. Sorry, Emily.
Yeah.
Okay. Give yourself a little grace. You're doing the right thing already by showing up to a community like this, asking these questions. When I was in your shoes as a marketing associate, I certainly wasn't brave enough to do that. So hats off to you.
Mm-hmm.
As I look back, and I too kind of felt that like crippling, holy shit, how do I get this all done by myself feeling? The best way I could do it kind of maps to what Mallory is saying, is like chunk it out, like come up with your 30, 60, 90-day plan and just start to activate that. And as you kind of like put your plan in motion, you'll start learning like what's working well, what's not working well, and use your leadership team, like Mallory said, to kind of gut check you along the way. The other piece that I love is absolutely take advantage of your executives network. I think that is something that is really like an unsung hero in the tech industry. Like the farther along you get in it, the more you realize everyone has worked with everyone at some point. It's crazy. So definitely take advantage of that. And then if you are connected in any of your like university network alumni groups on LinkedIn or anything like that, just like, don't be afraid to reach out. At the end of the day, like the best way I kind of think about like mentorship is you never want to, be a burden on someone, but on the flip side of that, nearly everyone is always willing to lend a helping hand if you approach it with like, here's my outcome, here's my objective, and I'm just feeling a little stuck here, would love your advice on XYZ. So I think you're obviously brave enough to get those conversations started, and it just kind of like balls in your court to start moving it forward to do like the outreach.
And Emily, if you need advice, DM me. I'm happy to help. Like I'll be a mentor if you have questions and things. I'm sure everybody here would. So, don't be shy.
100%. You now know where to find us. So that's the good news.
Oh, my heart's so happy. I think what you both said is outstanding. One of the things that is probably an aha moment for a lot of folks on this call, you both mentioned it, is tapping into your executive network. I didn't even know that was an option. I was building a community at Clary, and I was talking with our CEO, and he was like, "Oh, well, why don't you talk with our like VC folks?" and see the people in their portfolio. If you see a company there with a great community and you want to talk with their community manager, let me know and I'll ask them, and they'll create that connection. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that's an option. Like, that's amazing. And it's cool because you both are so right. They want to see your company succeed. And if this is a way for them to make billions of dollars on it, then like that's a really easy thing for them to do. It's a very easy free lift. So I think that. Yeah. It's outstanding. And if you're worried about it, don't be. I would imagine, and I think both of you would probably agree as leaders, you would rather have someone come to you with ideas of how they could be more successful than have to go to them and say, we're not seeing this drive. We're not seeing you ask for help. And so, just be encouraged that people are more likely to help you if you're asking for help early on than wait 3 months, things be really up a creek and have to really dig yourself out of that. So awesome advice, you guys. We've got some really good questions coming in. Rachel Shapiro asked a really great question. Have you ever felt like it wasn't always realistic to do what's being asked of you? Everything with no resources to help support. And how do you handle that?
Every day.
Yeah. Right this second. Probably in 2 minutes, probably tomorrow.
It's a great question though. And I'll take a first pass at this, Mallory, and then kick it over to you. I think it's really important I know I keep saying this, but this is like my type A personality shining through bright and early. Like come up with your plan and then ruthlessly prioritize. As I came up in my career, I was really fortunate. Katie mentioned I have a good mix of like startup and corporate experience. So I got my start in a payments like fintech company because I didn't have a job coming out of college. I didn't want to move home, found this job. It worked out for like 6 months. And then I transitioned into agency PR. And that's kind of where I always say that like I got like my like corporate education. And it was so helpful to me foundationally because it forced me to put together like plans for clients and understand like if I'm an account team of one person, I can only do X, Y, and Z as an account coordinator at that time. And that kind of education is something that I've really taken with me as I've kind of grown through the ranks, especially transitioning to Salesforce and now over to Qualified. I think ultimately what it comes down to is ruthless prioritization and upward communication. And it's okay to say no, but for me, I always like to have kind of like a reason why I'm saying no. And again, kind of like approaching that conversation as a brainstorm or negotiation instead of like oh, I just can't do this. It's like, oh, like I can't take this on because I'm working on XYZ. On this list of XYZ, is there anything that should fall so that this can replace this? And that's oftentimes a really hard conversation to have. And especially if you have a leader that I've definitely experienced who's like, okay, well, here's A, B, C, D, E, F now that you need to get done. Like sometimes you kind of are stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like there's just no getting around that. But I think the more you communicate like upward about kind of what the challenges that you have and like where the give is against your priorities, the better shape you'll be in the long run.
No, 100%. I mean, I completely agree. I think the other thing is data. So, if you have the situation, I'm sure you've all done it, when you're updating your resume, you put all the great things you've done, you put in the data to show how you've gotten there. Do the same thing for this to say, these are all the reasons data-wise why I can't do it, or why this other thing is actually going to bring in more for our goals. Do you want me to reach my goals or do you want me to do this thing? And if you kind of give them the options, it feels like they're in control still of that decision, which, depending on your boss is probably important. And it's a great way of doing it. But at the same time, if you're in a startup, there's the other angle where they might still be like, well, this is a startup, make it happen, which is also a valid argument, unfortunately, for a lot of startups. So, a thing that depending again on your organization structure, if you have partners, usually your partners are, more funded, they've got more resources, bigger teams. If you partner with them on whatever the activity is you think you need to do to get there or the project that you have to deliver, then you kind of have shared resources, probably with a bigger impact. So you could do that. And it's the same thing with mentoring. Like if you reach out to somebody in a company of your partners and you're like, hey, you might not have worked with us yet, or we're going to be partners soon, technically with an integration or whatever it is. they're very much probably more ahead in their plan to be like, oh, actually, we're doing this event. Would you want to do this with us? Or you could say, we're doing this, we'll fund it. Would you want to get in? And then you have their audience to kind of piggyback off of. So you can also, make your own resources happen in certain ways, but it depends on what you're trying to do.
Totally.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And I love the talk track of like, hey, here's, last week you asked me to focus on this. Is this still a priority, or do you want me to bump that down? And if so, when would you expect that due, so I can make this a bigger priority? Because you're totally right. Whenever you position it like that, oftentimes leadership says, oh, I forgot that I assigned you that, right? They're like, oh, I forgot you were still working on that.
And let's not minimize how hard of a conversation that is to have.
Yeah.
Right. Like the whiplash effect is real. And so I think, Mallory, you hit it best. And we, a couple weeks ago, we just hosted a virtual event with Sarah Franklin, who's the CMO of Salesforce. And a way that she was talking about it, negotiating with difficult stakeholders, is exactly what you said, which is don't react and just put the data forth.
Mm-hmm.
And that is like, especially for me, like I'm obviously very outgoing. My first reaction is to like, no, but you said, but just like take a step back, put the data in place and just be like, okay, here is the lay of the land. How do you want to tackle this? Or how do you want me to tackle this?
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit I am not an extrovert. I force it for marketing, honestly, but I am very much happy to sit in silence for a day and just have my dog and husband. So I do hide behind the data, but it works. Like you don't have to be like, oh, well, my opinion, or, oh, well, I believe, any of those things where they could turn and, all this stuff. It's more so, well, this is what the data says. You can't argue at all.
Yeah.
It's very black and white.
Yeah.
It's very binary.
Yes.
I love that. I think that's huge. And Emma, totally to your point, it's a lot harder than we're probably making it sound. Oftentimes those conversations it's really difficult if you don't have a great rapport with your leadership. And it's really difficult especially if you're new. I can't even imagine my first job out of college saying, hey, are you sure you want me to work on, you know what I mean? Like, I can't even imagine. I would have
laughed right out of the room.
Yeah. Mallory and I were talking about this yesterday or earlier this week, and I shared I have this horrible, ideally unrealistic fear that like I'll just get fired at any time. And so my first job out of college, actually my first few jobs, I would just pack up my desk anytime that my leadership would be like, hey, let's have a meeting. And I would just like lose my mind. I'm like, they're firing, and I'll pack up my desk. I kept a duffel bag under my desk so I could just easily pack it up. And I would pack it up every time, and they'd be like, oh, we just want to see how you're doing. And I'm like, I don't know where this irrational fear is coming from, but whatever. So
but everyone feels it, like no matter what, no matter what stage, age, like title you have. I literally always operate as if I'm about to get fired.
Yeah.
I think we all
I don't know
how
good that is for us, but all that's to say, understand that a lot of this advice is really dependent on your relationship with your leadership. And there's different things. And I really like how Mallory pointed out that she may not be the most extroverted person. So she's found that the data and providing that makes her feel more comfortable to have those conversations. So I just encourage, if you're like Emma and I, and you feel like you've got a great relationship and you're all the time, like there's different ways to have that conversation. Or if you resonate more with Mallory, that there's other options for you. So like just be encouraged that this isn't ever going to be a one size fits all type thing. It's really just dependent on who you are in your relationship. So
totally.
If you guys are okay with it, the next conversation that we're gonna kind of shift into is work-life balance around having children and not having children, and setting boundaries and expectations with leadership. This can be a controversial topic, and so hopefully I'm just encourage everyone to take it all with perspective and recognize that what works for one person may not work for everybody, and that it's all very situational. So with that said, Emma, as you're going through this process of getting ready to be on maternity leave, what does that look like, and how are you setting up balance for that?
Great question. Every day it feels a little different, to be honest. February 1st feels closer and closer. But I would be remiss not to kind of level set with, I have had literally the two best examples of women in leadership who are also moms. but also define themselves as moms and women in leadership. So my sister is, she's an analyst relations over at Amazon, and she has 3 kids under 4. And then my boss, Maura, here at Qualified, just had her 3rd baby. She's our CMO. So I have had the incredible opportunity to learn by osmosis, not necessarily by experience yet. So let's like revisit this in 6 months when I'm like crumbling when I'm back to work, but neither here nor there. But I think a couple things that I've learned really kind of from them as they've prepped for mat leave 1 and 2 while they've been on mat leave and experienced it is, I know I keep coming back to this, but over communication and having a plan in place is not only going to make your team and your leadership, fellow leaders feel better, but also you feel better, because at the end of the day, like, it's really weird. Like, there's no other word I can describe it, to think about like taking a step back from your job for 4 months to like step into a new identity and then think like, oh God, but then I have to come back to this. And so how do I want to like step away, turn my brain off completely, but then come back to it in a place that like kind of makes sense, even though I know that the business will change so much that everything that I'm like walking away from will be like a full 180 from where it is at the point in time when I come back. So I usually have a very expansive vocabulary, but weird is the only way that I can describe it. And I've been really challenging myself to, 1, trust my team. We're not saving lives, we're generating pipeline. So at the end of the day, like, the most important thing to me is I bring these boys into the world healthy, happy, and everyone's all hunky-dory. And 2, empowering people on my team to step up into the role that I have and give them an opportunity to like really excel at Qualified. That's something that Maura has done with me in some of like our internal projects and the external facing things. And it's been a huge challenge, but also like she's only been out not even a month yet. And some of the things I'm tackled, I'm like, oh my God, like 3 months ago, I could have never done that. So I really want to take her example of like trust in challenging her team, and kind of like package that into my plan, because it's been really inspirational to me. And I really want to like empower everybody else on my team to feel that same kind of like motivation and ownership. As it relates to like my other leaders on my team, it's really hard not to feel bad, like, it's like, oh God, like, I know I'm leaving a hole. I also recognize like the world will continue to spin without me, as much as I hate to admit it, but it will. But it's really hard not to like feel guilty or bad, and just kind of like regrounding in my values of, again, my number 1 priority in my life is to make sure that these 2 are okay. And then work will sort itself out. And that's a really, really hard thing to continually remind yourself, especially when you're a high performer and you want to be like on all cylinders in every aspect of your life. So that was kind of a maze to get to that answer, but as you can tell, it's something that's causing me a lot of stress. So if anyone on this call has any advice, I'm very open to it. My sister and Maura have been hugely helpful in the examples that they've provided, but it's just a crazy, crazy mental journey to like even approach.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your transparency on that, because I can't even imagine. I'm sure there's so many folks on this call that have considered having kids, and it's like, what do you do? I know for myself, whenever I think about it, like, personally, I have no desire to be a stay-at-home mom. I don't want to stop my career. So it's like, what and how do you fit that? And just the thought of like leaving for 6 months scares the shit out of me. I don't even know what I would do. But Olivia just shared in the chat just some really great words of wisdom. She also has 3 kids under 4, and there are a few things that are important for leaders and new moms keep in mind. Just because your mat leave is over, it doesn't mean you're completely back to normal. It takes at least 6-9 months to feel like you have a routine, you aren't as distracted, can really focus, and are finally sleeping better. And that in fact works. And this is my favorite part. There's so much grace needed between when you go back to work and baby's first birthday. So much change is happening. And it helps to have a compassionate leader and to be compassionate with yourself. And Rachel says, we're very lucky.
Like, you just have to keep reminding yourself that, because it's, to your point, Katie, like at the, I always have what I call like 2 a.m. thoughts, which is super healthy, but they start kicking and I wake up and I'm like, what do I have to do today? The thought, at the back of your head is like, how do I get all this done, but then not take my foot off the gas? Because to your point, I want to come back to work. I can't wait to get myself to C-suite somewhere one day, like I want to keep growing. And we have so many incredible female leaders in the tech industry to look to that like have high titles and big families. And no one does it alone. Right. So like, how do you I don't know. You're just everyone figures it out, I guess.
Yeah. I would imagine the response we would get is it's just day by day.
Yeah. Minute by
like
minute.
Everything else, day by day. We have a really great question, and congratulations to this person. They just found out that they are newly pregnant. But she doesn't know what to do. She has a team. She doesn't have a team. She's newly pregnant and she didn't get maternity leave with her first. So she doesn't know if that's going to be an option. So Emma, if you were in her shoes, if you just found out you were pregnant, you were a team of one, what would you recommend as maybe like the first 2 or 3 steps this person might want to look at?
This might be a little bit of a hot take, so bear with me. Obviously, I don't know anything about this person's situation, but something that's really important to me is finding a company that aligns with my personal values. And if one of your values is family and you're at a company that doesn't provide parental leave, that to me is at odds and maybe not the best fit. And I totally recognize that, like, go getting a new job right now, when you look at LinkedIn and it's like layoff is a lot easier said than done. But I do think it is a good opportunity to kind of assess where you are right now and if it is the right fit for you.
Yeah, I love that. Another question that came in I thought was really interesting. It's also anonymous. She's going through fertility treatments, I'm assuming, and you have to go to a lot of doctor's appointments. In my understanding with pregnancy is, regardless, you're going through a lot of doctor's appointments. What do you do whenever you have to have that awkward conversation with a male leader? I know you work with a female leader, but like, those are kind of awkward sometimes. So what would you recommend?
It's all about your level of comfort. So for example, I experienced some sort of fertility issues in the spring before I got pregnant with these boys. I actually had a miscarriage the day that we announced our Series C funding that I was leading from like a content and communications perspective. So really fun day at work, not so great personally. And I actually told my male leader about it because I was not able to show up to work literally because my doctor's appointments for the ensuing week. So I think that's kind of an extreme level of like comfort, but like, that's what made me feel better, because I wanted to be super honest with like, I'm not going to Mexico right now. I'm literally going to the hospital and I can't be here for this. But I think blocking your calendar is always like a really helpful tactic. And then not being afraid to honor those commitments on your blocked calendar is really important. And if they do ask probing questions, I think it's very fair to say like, it's honestly a personal thing. It's a doctor's appointment and I can't swing meeting at this time today, which again is a very brave thing to do. So like, I don't want to minimize that at all, because it is awkward, because you're like, oh, I should be responding. But one of my old bosses always used to tell me, stop shoulding on yourself. And so like, stop telling yourself, I should do this, or I should feel this way, or we should be doing this. Like, just, if you have to honor a commitment in the middle of your workday, block your calendar and just say, I'm sorry, this is non-negotiable. I have to be out of the office at this time.
I love that. Stop shitting on yourself.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit here, because a lot of the questions that have come through is just kind of dealing with hard situations. One of the conversations that I want to kind of focus on is promotion and what that looks like. Christina asked a really great question about, if you don't want to manage people and just want to keep being an individual contributor, is there a limit to how high you can climb in an org? And Mallory, I'll let you take that one.
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, again, it's all depending on the company and what you view you want to do in your career and what you're specializing in, which I'm assuming your here is probably demand. But I don't think so. I've seen loads of leaders. I mean, even in engineering, my husband's one, and he's technically, old enough, I'll call him that, to be a CTO. He doesn't want to do it. He wants to just focus on code, just do it. I have managed people and I haven't. I've been CMO, I've been VP, I've been head of, all the different titles. I don't really care too much about titles, but moving up I've worked with people in product that were, VP of product and didn't have anybody reporting to them. They kind of, what I call, maybe it's a thing, I don't know, side managing. So you have other people and other teams that can help you be those resources, but you have the title if that's what you want. You have, the salary, you've got the responsibility, but you're not then, having to have one-to-ones, having to manage all these people, having to be responsible for their career growth too. So I think it just depends on, one, what direction you want to go company-wise. If you're in startups, I think there's a lot more room to not manage people that direction. But, if you're in the corporate, there's probably equally amount. It just depends on the company. And then it also depends on how the company has already structured the department or role that you're going for. So if you go in open about, I'm applying for this role, or I want to be promoted into this role, but I do not want to manage people, they'll likely work around it because you're probably awesome and they probably want to have you on board and they don't want to lose you. So, just make it clear. And it's, like everything we've said here, I think, they are awkward conversations. Everything in your career is probably going to be awkward at some point. Own it, be uncomfortable, just force yourself to step out of that for a moment and get what you want. Because at the end of the day, if you don't, you're probably gonna be miserable managing people. They're not going to want to report to you because you don't want to manage them. And it's just weird relationship. So, just kind of, I don't know, go for it is all I could say, but make sure that you're interviewing the companies as much as you are, them interviewing you when you're going for those roles.
I love that. Oh, Christina, I love your response. That's great. She loves executing. Can't imagine getting pulled further away from that and watching other people have all the fun without her. That's awesome. And Lauren, thank you for sharing your situation and that it's possible. She's a director of comms at a corporate SaaS company. She doesn't have direct reports, but she has an entire comms and content strategy. Goodness, you guys must be glutton for punishments because that's a lot of work to do all on your own. That's a lot. We also had another question come in. Emma, how did you know your end goal was to be a CMO as opposed to landing at the VP level?
Totally. I'm not a CMO yet, so let's just, level set there. I've had an interesting career path. I think we all have. But things that I knew at a young age that like really stuck out to me that I really enjoyed are creative communication. And then like, there is like a side of my English major brain that like really loves data. And so as I kind of got started in my career in PR, I loved the creativity. I loved the cross collaboration. I loved coming up with like big brand campaigns and then doing the activations against them. And then as I got more and more exposed to like marketing agency life, that's kind of where like the nerdy side of my brain kind of clicked. And really, really interested me from kind of just like a critical analysis point of view. Like we did like really fun campaigns, but never like really measured them from a PR perspective. So as I have kind of grown into marketing, that is something that, full transparency, I feel like so kind of naive to still, like the whole measurement side of like the pipeline piece and demand gen is definitely not my strength area. I'm so fortunate to work with Sarah McConnell, who's our VP of demand gen, who is like literally brilliant. So I feel like I ask her every dumb question that I have. But it is something that really intrigues me. And so for me, what really motivates me is curiosity. And so long as I feel that like curiosity, I really want to stay in the lane that I'm in, even if it's not necessarily something I'm the best at yet. Mallory, I'd love to hear about your experience with that. Like, how did you know you wanted to stay you mentioned like you've worn so many different hats. How do you know you wanted to kind of stay in this lane?
Yeah, I mean, I did have the goal to be CMO, and I didn't realize in the startup world how quickly you can move up. So I did get CMO by the time I was even 30, which is cool. But I've also not been one to care too much about job titles. That was just more of a fun goal. It's more so like like you said, curiosity, what role can you do? So now, I've kind of, I was CMO, now I'm head of marketing. To some people that might look like I suck at everything and I've gone down in my career and my life's ending, but it's not. It's more so, the opportunity in the startup to like be the only person and try this new market and try all the things and figure it out, to me is like the biggest puzzle and so fun. So now it's more so when I'm happy here, but if I ever do change, it's, finding something that tests me on my skills or gives me a new opportunity to try something else. And I would recommend other people do the same, even when you're moving up, just because you don't want to do something just for the sake of a title and be miserable for a few years. That's probably the worst thing on the planet.
And I think something that another one of my former bosses, she was like literally a sage wizard. Which wizard? I'm going to call her wizard. Was growth is not linear. Like just because you are not taking a step up in your title doesn't mean you're not necessarily growing. And so as you chart the course of your career, you got to take laterals, you might take a step back, but it's all part of the process that will get you eventually to where you need to be.
Yeah. Also, like, just for anybody who isn't actually in marketing and is on here, I've seen so many people on LinkedIn with these layoffs. They're like, you know what? I'm taking this. I was in sales or product. I'm going to do marketing now. And they're taking it as an opportunity to switch careers. And, technically before marketing, I studied and I was a full-on nurse. I was like, wiping people's butts, all the things. And now I'm marketing. So, you can also switch entirely and go from, like Emma said, you could go from demand and SEO to PR to all the different things. So, don't feel stuck in a certain lane just to reach your goal. You can go it's like that, the meme with Charlie Days from Always Sunny, and it's just all the math in front of him. It could be like that. So just have fun with it.
Totally.
So I guess what piece of advice, maybe each of you could share 1 to 2 things, 1 to 2 pieces of advice for folks who are looking to either make a career change or looking to move upwards. How can they better position themselves? What's maybe 1 to 2 things that you would look for if you were hiring right now, that would like really help someone stand out?
For me, I think
sorry,
Mallory, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Being results oriented is really helpful. Competition has never been more fierce and nor jobs fewer out there, right? Like this is my first economic whatever situation that we're in. And so it's been a really interesting time to just kind of like see how people are still getting hired. I have friends who've been laid off. I have family members who've been laid off, and like how everyone's managing that. So I think putting your best foot forward with like the impact and results that you've shown is a good way to kind of get ahead of the competition. And to me, as a hiring manager, I want someone on my team who's going to provide, immediate impact and hit the ground running and show motion quickly. So for me, I think in this time, show how you can be efficient, show how you can be productive, and really just, I know Mallory mentioned this earlier, but just approach this whole negotiation or job search with data first.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it is hard, like knowing what every single person wants when they're hiring. So again, I think this goes back to things that Emma and Katie both said earlier. Network, right now, I mean, I don't have the biggest network in the world, but the people that, I do know, or the people that you might know support you enough. They might have a job that they've heard of through another Slack group that they're in that isn't public, and it fits everything that you've ever wanted. Reach out to people that they'll support you if you are looking. You again, use this community, use other community groups for marketers. There's always things out there. But at the same time, when I'm hiring, it's, CVs I can't give advice on CVs. I don't know why. Sometimes I like someone's CV because they are usually relevant, but honestly, they all blend together to a point. But in the interview, like I geek out over marketing. If you haven't noticed, do that. If if you're hiring for something that you specialize in, just show how excited you are. You don't have to be excited about the company. I mean, you're probably doing multiple interviews. You don't love every single company, but if the role excites you and you love what you do, like literally just be yourself and talk about it, get excited. And if they don't hire you, from what I found with my career and other people that I've worked with, whatever you do land with is probably the best option you could have found anyway. So anything you don't get, you didn't need it in your life.
100%. You're interviewing the company just as much as the company is interviewing you. And nothing about this is personal. It can feel very personal, but at the end of the day, it ain't.
Exactly.
I love that. Mallory, we just got a question for you. How did you overcome being young in the startup world, but gunning for growth and taking on more experienced positions?
started out with a lot of being naive and thinking I knew everything. But it's very humbling. You learn very quickly you don't. And it's, it's easy to feel awkward, but I kind of, y'all are probably gonna think I'm crazy after I say this, but I kind of, because I am an introvert, have this thing where I kind of have two personalities. So at work, I talk like this, I'm outgoing, I'm being loud in Slack, I'm saying we need to do this. And if you don't, the world's gonna end or whatever. But at home, I'm very quiet with my friends. I'm a lot more quiet and all of that. So you kind of have to figure out what works for you. And like I said, if you have a career path you want to go in that startup, or if you feel like you need a promotion or you need a new person to hire, you just have to, be humble and literally just start being completely transparent. It builds up a good relationship with the people in your company. But at the same time, if you don't have, a great relationship with your boss, there's other people, and I'm not saying go around your boss, but build up relationships with others who are maybe the same level, HR, CEO, whoever, and start kind of piecing together how you can make everything work. Like if you want a promotion, just speak to HR and say like, this is why I think I need it. We can bring in my boss, but he's not, or she's not giving me what I need. Let's do it. And just kind of, like I said, make your own resources, piece together everything, and it'll work out. But it is a lot of awkwardness. It's a lot of uncomfortableness, but you kind of have to thrive in it. And now I do. I don't know if I could do corporate, honestly. If somebody already had a plan in place and I went in, I'd be like, well, what do you want me to do now?
I love that. We've only got about 8 minutes left, and we've got two really good questions that I think will probably take a good amount of time. But it deals with working with a female leader versus a male leader and kind of finding your voice in some of those discussions. Amanda asked a great question. She's in an interesting situation where her female counterpart left, and now she's reporting to almost an all-male team. And they're very loud, very outspoken, and she's feeling like her voice is becoming more and more quiet. How do you navigate something like that? How do you find your voice again, and how do you kind of set yourself up for success in a situation where you feel squeezed out of?
Mallory, I feel like this is like your name all over it.
I know I didn't want to jump in, but so, okay. I'll try and shorten it because again, this could be a whole webinar, honestly. So like I said, I've mostly had male bosses, good and bad throughout the years. With me just saying that, you couldn't look at my LinkedIn and figure out. But what I would say is, one, if you feel like you're not being heard, and a lot of companies unfortunately do care about seniority levels and all those things, find someone who is the same level as whoever is not listening to you in the company, and develop a relationship with them, build allyship with them. And then a lot of times, if it's another female, they'll probably do it naturally. But in a meeting, if you say something, which we've all been there, you said something, when ignored 2 minutes later, some guy says the same thing. They're like, oh my God, it's the best idea ever. You're promoted or whatever, like in all the Hallmark movies. Have somebody step in or do it yourself if you're comfortable and say, actually, I said that a few minutes ago. If you do it yourself, or if, you did actually say it a few minutes ago and you've prepared, say, it's not rude to say this, by the way. I know we are all afraid to be combative in conversations. Just kind of, again, be uncomfortable and just say, yeah, I said that a few minutes ago. Do you want me to send you the documents I put together for it already, or the plans or whatever, if you have it, to show that you were owning it and you're happy for them to take lead if you don't want to do it and it's something that you plan for anyways. Otherwise, also do the same for other people in your company. If there's another person who's maybe more junior, they have a great idea, and then a guy or a woman, whoever, steps in and doesn't listen, and then somebody else takes credit, say, oh, actually, that person just said the same thing. So-and-so, did you want to elaborate on that? That was a great idea. Just those little details in meetings honestly go such a long way. That's the biggest thing I would say for not being heard, and just speaking up. Otherwise, you can get more aggressive and just saying, oh, actually, I just said that. Depends on the comfort levels.
Honestly, and I just want to add too, if you're in a meeting where you see that happening, you can also be that advocate. You can also say, hey, I think Mallory actually just said that. Mallory, you want to expand on it? It doesn't take someone in a VP or a leadership title to advocate for each other and create a better work environment. So I just want to encourage all of you that every single one of us are going to be in a situation over the next few weeks and years where we can be that person and help one of our peers. So Rock on, you guys. Okay.
Emma, what's your take? Because you've worked with like more women, so I'm curious, like, what is that world like?
It's hard. Like Mallory, I can't even begin to put myself in your shoes of how difficult and frustrating and like demoralizing some of those situations have been in. Again, I've only had female bosses in my career, which is kind of crazy to think about over the last dozen years, not to age myself, but I think what's been really inspirational is Maura. Again, she's our CMO here at Qualified. There's 2 women on our leadership team, and she is so different than the men on our leadership team. And I think she kind of takes a very like results oriented approach to those types of conversations. And again, Mallory, you mentioned this earlier, you can't argue with data. And so kind of leading with that information and arming your team or the people that you're negotiating with, like the binary black and white information that you can is a really effective way to do that. Personally, I sometimes like to kind of diffuse those situations with humor. And so Katie, to your point, if I see that happen, I'll be like, oh my God, like Joe, great idea. Maura just had that. Great minds think alike.
Yeah.
Isn't that so funny how that works out?
I love that.
I love that even more because I can only imagine you in that type of a situation. Be like, oh
steam
wow,
coming out of my ears, but still smiling.
And then another question that we got from Kelsey is, how do you balance, especially as a woman, the advice of technical stakeholders in drawing a firm line when it comes to a marketing decision? Having people from product and research development wanting to make decisions on your behalf when they don't even know, they know nothing about marketing. I know you both have had situations like this. So I'm curious, what do you do in something like that?
Emma, do you want to go first in this one?
Sure. I think just being thoughtful about the way that you kind of approach it and coming with I'm going to go back to this, like every conversation can be a brainstorm or a negotiation. There's no hard and fast reason of why something should happen or why something shouldn't happen. Come with your why and be prepared to explain it and kind of like live it. And then the harder part of that is come with an open mind as to what their why is and approach that conversation less as kind of like a combative back and forth and more of just like okay, this is what's happening in your world. This is what's happening in my world. There has to be a Venn diagram at some point where we can overlap and find a solution.
100%. It also goes back into, data, but also your own expertise. So, again, you're not being combative by pushing back on these things. It is awkward though. Awkward is just the theme. Maybe that's my theme. I don't know.
I'm with you. Nothing about this.
When you go into these conversations, you probably do have a stronger reason for your why because they're asking to take over something you should own. So you say, well, in my expertise, or it's kind of like, the political way you respond to emails instead of saying you're full of shit. And you're like, oh, well, about that or whatever. It's that kind of thing. You can just say, with my expertise, I've experienced this, and this is what I know to be true. Here's the data. And then, I'm sure there are pieces of gold in their ideas and things that you'd want to incorporate, let them feel like they're contributing, but still be the owner and say, oh, actually, I love this element that you've added, or I love this suggestion that you have, or this person on your team would actually be really good to help on this. And, still make it a team effort because, again, marketing is involved in every department, whether they like it or not, and just, work together. And, I think that's probably the best way.
Totally.
I love that. Well, we've only got about like 30 seconds left. So got a lot of questions still. And if everyone's okay with it, I'm going to drop them anonymously into the Slack channel so we can actually get advice from not just our amazing guests, Mallory and Emma, but everyone in the channel. And hopefully we'll get some really unique perspectives for y'all with the limited amount of time. Really quickly, Emma and Mallory, what's one piece of advice that you would give our guests and our attendees today that can be a word of encouragement or just like a general piece of advice for them?
I would say number one, be awkward. It works for me, apparently. Number two is, I think from the comments that I've seen, everybody does have imposter syndrome. Everybody, wants to move up. Everybody's not sure of how they should get somewhere in their career. Honestly, reach out to people who are there. If it's, if I can help, if Emma can help, or Katie, or if it's people that, you might think are like the gods of marketing on LinkedIn, message them. The worst they could do is ignore you. And if they do, then they're probably not that great. But at the same time, they're probably willing to help. Like Emma said, everybody's willing to help. So just reach out, get advice. I haven't met anyone at any level that isn't like, oh, actually, I would suggest this, or here's a free template, all these things. Just, get out there and just speak to people.
Totally. +1 to all of the above. And then also just give yourself grace. Like, this is not an easy industry. It's not an easy time. So remember your values, map to your values, and just give yourself grace and space to make decisions, because even though things may seem so overwhelming or so urgent, more often than not, it's not. And so just kind of relying on your values as kind of like your guide throughout these processes is something that's really helped and served me.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love that. Well, amazing. Thank you to everyone that's been here. Huge thank you to Emma and Mallory. This was absolutely outstanding. I'm so excited for hopefully the next one. But if any of you have questions, feel free to DM any of us directly in the community, or come and drop them in the Women in Marketing channel. And that is all. I hope you all have a fabulous day. And once again, thank you so much, Emma and Mallory. This was outstanding, very encouraging. So thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. This was awesome.
So fun.
Bye, y'all. Have
Bye,
a good
guys.
one.